Okay. Good afternoon and welcome everyone to our third and last session of the day. Our today's speaker who's going to take us through grant proposal writing is Dr. Tanya Brodowski. I'm sorry if I pronounce your surname wrong, but I'll quickly introduce her before she starts taking us through her presentation. Tanya is trained as a medical biological scientist and obtained a PhD in clinical science and immunology from the University of Cape Town. During her academic and research career, she has been successful in obtaining research grant funding and fellowships, amongst which is a Fulbright scholarship at the Rockefeller University in New York, USA. She has published internationally and has supervised postgraduate students. In her current capacity at the Faculty of Medicine and Health Sciences at Stellenbosch University, she is responsible for research capacity development. She manages internal research funding and also guides researchers to appropriate research funding opportunities. Welcome to our Library Research Week, Tanya, and I would like you to empower us with your skills and knowledge on grant proposal writing. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pakama, for that gracious introduction. I just want to check you can see my slides and you can hear me clearly, right?
Yes, I can. I hope everybody can.
Perfect. Thank you so much for the opportunity. And I'm always excited to attend the Library Week sessions. And today I'll be hosting one. So thank you very much for this initiative and the invitation. Just a disclaimer that I come from a health sciences background, but grant proposal writing is a generic field and I'll try to make it as generic as possible, but you will have to excuse that some examples are from my field. I will leave some questions for the end. There is a session for questions towards the end, but if you want to park a question, please post it in the chat. I will get to it at some point. And unfortunately, in an hour's time, there won't be much time for interactivity. So what I will be covering this afternoon are basic introduction to just rules of engagement. How does funding work? I know the audience is diverse in discipline and also in a level of experience. So I will assess in a short while what the needs are. I will talk about funder guidelines and being responsive to a funding call because that's essential as a starting point. And I will touch on each of the sections, the typical sections in grant proposals, so that I can give you a few pointers and tips. I will have to touch on the review criteria because that you can transform to be your tick box to make sure that you cover all the elements and you cover them adequately to have a chance to get research funding. And I will finish off with some tips and traps before a question and answer session. So first of all, if you can please use the chat just so I can get a sense, because of the diversity of the audience, what is your biggest challenge about grant writing? Just brainstorm, give me any idea. What is most difficult for you? Where do you usually get stuck? What section of a grant proposal is maybe the most challenging? For those of you who have some experience, if you don't have experience, I mean, what is daunting for you? Why are you here today? Let me just get a sense. All right, someone wants to know what reviewers are looking for. I will definitely cover that. Budget, yes, budget comes up strongly. Focus of a grant proposal is budget. Right, the motivation for funding and the potential impact, yes, that can be a very challenging aspect, Larissa. Budget, okay, budget comes up a lot. I have got budget covered quite extensively. Funding for non-profit organizations, yes, interesting. I think grant proposals are really depending on, for all of the funders out there, you will stick to more or less the same recipe that I will cover today. Motivation, there's a budget motivation, and of course, a whole grant proposal is to try and motivate funders to give you funding. Sell your ideas. Yes, I like to see selling, and it's a marketing document. You have to sell your ideas and you have to stand out above the rest. Finding funders, yes, I see that, but I did indicate in the advertisement that I've got one slide on that, but the focus is today on grant proposal writing and not finding the correct opportunity. Okay, tailoring your research question to the funder topic. Spot on. You have to absolutely link that, or you're not going to do it. Killer thread. Oh, I like that. I call it the golden thread. Right. So let me get going. I think from what I've seen, write a winning proposal. Yes, got to win. It's a competitive business. I'm going to start with the rules of engagement. Now, there are so many terms out there really for grant proposals. I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page. The most commonly used one, grant proposal, it's also called a funding proposal or funding application. My very simplistic definition of it, it's a document outlining a research project for which you are seeking funding. It's typically solicited by a call or an advertisement from a funder, where they invite you to apply. You can approach funders unsolicited, but that doesn't happen a lot, but it is possible. And funders can be a variety of organizations or bodies. It can be national sources, international sources. It can be in-house Stellenbosch University sources. Can be governmental, non-governmental, non-profit organizations, philanthropic organizations. So there are a lot of funders out there, and there is a lot of funding out there, but you have to do some grinding work to get there, and you have to do it right to get the funding. So a typical funding cycle works where, first of all, another term that we commonly use in this industry is a funding call. It actually means a funding advertisement or invitation to apply for funding, after which you as the researcher will apply. And of course, like with anything else in this world, the deadlines are always looming and they creep up faster than what we can get away from. And the key word is funders will make awards competitively. And your competitors are maybe the colleagues on the call in your discipline. It can be similar people discipline-wise nationally, if it's a national funder, and even internationally. So you have to really stand out to be able to get funding. And then once you get funding, you can go ahead and pay for all of your research-related expenses from a funder. You are never supposed to pay it from your own pocket. So they, at any level, from undergraduate level right through to seasoned researchers, there are sources for all. So Dr. van Zyl, finding funders, that is a tricky one. But firstly, I'll come to that in a bit. But announcing a funding opportunity, I already said we call it a funding call or advertisement. Some funders call it a funding announcement, others a funding opportunity announcement, others a request for applications. The South African Medical Research Council, the call for self-initiated research grants was just advertised this morning, and they call it RFAs. Call for proposals, funding scheme, there are more terms like that, but we are talking about the same thing of an invitation to apply if you see any of these words. Typically in the process, there's a long waiting game involved, following the deadline, where you wait for review. The funder will give you an outcome letter, after which you can start the project, and down the line you have to report back to the funder. Since most of the funders do not ask of you to have ethics approval at the time of application, you can wisely use that waiting time to also put in your ethics application, because that can be a tedious and sometimes time-consuming process. Because a funder will never disburse the funds unless you have proof of valid ethics approval and current ethics approval. And I must also tell you, you have to do some planning here because funders are typically, you have to apply 1 year in advance of when you actually require the funds. So there is quite a delay, depends from funder to funder. Some are quicker, some are longer, but you cannot start recruiting participants or engaging with participants if you work with participants or collect data before ethics approval. And that would be for the majority of studies you would require ethics approval. So for funding opportunities, my suggestion in this one slide I have on the topic is that you talk to your colleagues, you talk to your supervisor if you're a student, you talk to your collaborators, talk to people with a little bit more experience. They will immediately be able to list a few funders that you could possibly consider in your field. We advertise throughout Stellenbosch University a lot of funding opportunities via emails from the different support offices. There are websites of all of those offices. The funders have their own information on their websites. And of course, there are people like me and other people and colleagues from the Division for Research Development who deal with specific funders, and they will then also be able to advise should you not know where to start. I also have to advocate the Open for Research platform that Stellenbosch University is subscribed to. It's a search engine that you can really drill down in fine detail to get weekly notices of exactly what is out there. And then Google, for example, is a generic search engine. You can even try that to obtain funding opportunities. So the funder guidelines and being responsive to a funding call is a key to unlock that potential research funding. And this is the one area where I find researchers sometimes want to take a shortcut and don't want to study the guidelines properly. I mean, it could be a simple one-pager, or it could be a book that you have to work through. I know European Union guidelines and frameworks, they are extensive reading to do, but you have to get a sense and get into it to be able to know what funders want, and also to make sure that you are responsive in meeting those requirements of the things that they want to fund. So the typical things that you find in guideline documents would be the funder's scope and priority and focus area. Very important to know, you have to match that. The funders will say who is eligible to apply for those opportunities advertised. They will give you detail about what format and length and more minor formatting things that you should consider in your funding application document. They are usually very transparent at how much funding they have available. Remember, if a funder advertises a funding opportunity, it means they already have ring-fenced funding available, and they simply invite you and other competitors to apply because they want to support research in a specific arena. So they usually say how much money in total they have available for a specific call. They sometimes indicate up to how many individual awards can be made. They will also indicate to you what period a project will be supported and when a project should start. So those are very important things to think about. Where are you at with your study? When are you planning to start? All of those things you should really read carefully and consider. I know of seasoned researchers who take the funder guideline document and spends time and old school use highlighters to highlight certain things. Even some of their words, they like to hear some of their own words. So that is another strategy that I will mention again later. But you can use, I mean, the modern way would be in a PDF document to do your highlights and your notes and everything. But this document really is something that will unlock things for you. They will give you information about the budget. I mean, you first of all need to know, and you will know, what it is that I need. what kind of items and the costs, and you look at the funder and zoom into the area where they talk about the budget, so that you are sure that they will fund the kinds of items that you actually need money for. The content, and I will go through it section by section and show you templates of funders, what they ask you, and they say specifically what they want you to cover in a funding application. Most of them also are very detailed about their review criteria. I will share with you later on some generic review criteria, but funders are very specific about that. And like I said, use it as a tick list so that you make sure you speak to each element that they indicate you will be scored on. And then, of course, the deadlines, if you miss it, you miss it. Nowadays, things are electronic and systems close. So make sure that you allow enough time, even for the technical glitches right towards the end. You know, we are really hampered by load shedding. Systems do crash when everyone tries to access it at the same time. So make sure you know exactly what the process is for that. So all of this information is available. The few that I'm highlighting here that is really the ones that will unlock the potential for getting funding is that you have to make sure it's like puzzle pieces fitting together. You have to make sure you are responsive and you and the funder are a match so that you will be considered for review. One of them, definitely the priority and focus area of the funder. It's essential that your research fits in 100% with what the funder is willing to sponsor. Your eligibility, and I will come to that in the next slide. The length and format of an application, and really funders can be so pedantic, but sometimes they will throw out an application simply because you haven't adhered to basics like that. Maximum budget, make sure that's a match, and then the period that it should align with your research. So for each of these, I've just got a few pointers. You have to go to the website if it's not evident in the guidelines. And you have to understand the scope and the mission and the vision of a funder to see whether there is alignment and responsiveness. Individual funding opportunities within that funder. I mean, some are maybe just for equipment. So if you're not in it for just equipment, that would not be an appropriate opportunity. And some other opportunities may be simply for appointing research assistants. So you will have to make sure that there's a match. Yeah, please just mute yourselves and videos off. There is some relay here on my side. Okay, thank you. So in terms of eligibility of the principal investigator, and that's another nice and fancy name that you can call yourself a PI if you're an applicant to a funder. That is usually the applicant that is known as the principal investigator, and that applicant needs to meet the eligibility criteria. Those criteria can be that you have to have a PhD, that you have to have a master's with certain years of research experience. It could be your career status. Some funds are just ring-fenced for early career researchers, some for postgraduate students, and other for just mute there, and others are for established researchers. So make sure that there's a match, that responsiveness, and some funders may dictate that you have to be of a certain nationality to apply for a given funding opportunity. Like I said, funders can be so pedantic, but consider A4 versus letter format paper. The Americans use the short fact version of papers, which is the letter format. If you do apply to an American funder, make sure, and it's usually in their guidelines, make sure that you have set your computer to the letter format and so forth. They are serious if they say there's a page limit, and they may throw out your application if you don't adhere to that, even as pedantic as font size and font type. Okay, so if a funder doesn't give you information about font size and font type, please just use a very clear font and don't go too small to try and cram in more information within limited space or word length limits. Make sure that I think the least I would go down to is font 11. Make sure that you do it right and that you make it, there's a human on the other side that has a lot of reviewing to do. Make it easy for the person to read, right? You don't want to annoy a reviewer right from the start. So think about it from a reviewer's hat too. Your funder will tell you which items are allowed and how much is allowed in total for you to apply for, even for the subcategories, and we will have a look at that when we get to the budget. Make sure that you link up and you're responsive to most of the items they are willing to fund. The period of start grants vary. Many are for only 1 year. So you apply for money, for example, now 2023 for 2024, and you have 12 months in which to do a small project. Other, especially international bodies like the National Institutes of Health and European Union projects, they can be up to 5, even longer duration in years. So those are big wins if you get money and securing funding for a big project and over an extended period. So make sure the length of your project that you propose will match what the funders' timelines are and what they are willing to fund. Just to let you know, these responsive criteria are so important because these things are usually screened by administrative staff from the funder. And if you don't adhere to all of these and all of these that they consider very important, your application will simply not reach reviewers and they will throw it out at the point of receiving it at the desk. So that is the sad thing about not being responsive. Okay, so I want you to just zoom out a bit. We've spent some time on the guidelines because it's so important that you really study those carefully. That will direct your choice. So if you zoom out, you recall that you get a funding opportunity announcement or advertisement. You study the guidelines very carefully, mark up what you need to mark up to note the important things. And also when you start writing, you go back to see those things that you've highlighted and check for responsiveness. If you tick all of those criteria of responsiveness, then you can discuss with your team or collaborators and decide whether or not you are going to take the plunge and apply. I'm warning you that it takes a lot of time and effort and sweat to get a funding proposal together. It's no small task. So make sure, firstly, before you dig in and start writing, that you tick all of those criteria and it's going to be a worthwhile investment in your career. Okay, I'm going to move on to section by section, and please feel free if anything is unclear to you. I might even just attend to some questions during the session, but feel free if there's anything that you need further clarity on, questions, post it in the chat. Right, so you have to just get started, and there are different ways in which to start. And for me, I'm a huge advocate of saying that you have to have a very final draft or a completed research protocol, right? Research protocol is your study plan that you would submit to get approved for degree studies or have ethics approval. So it's a very, very clear plan of your project, because those elements in there really are the main and the same main elements that you get in a grant proposal. And these are typically things like a clear plan what you will do. And think about aims and objectives. That is where that will come in. how you're going to do it, and who will be doing it. So the how would be your methods and your approach, and the who will be yourself as a principal investigator, and there may be team members that will work alongside you. How long it takes, so that timeline that you plan to do a research and your entire project, like I said, it should also be a responsive element, but you address that and you give a timeline in your proposal. How much, right? It's all about the budget. So how much and which items? So we will spend some time on that. And very, very importantly, even though you might think it's just common sense that I'm asking a brilliant research question and it's going to have a huge impact on some aspect in furthering knowledge in my particular field. But you have to spell it out to a funder, and even in more place than one. This is one of the key things they want to see. So what? What will the impact be immediately or even down the line of what you propose to do? What will the value be, the societal value? That's a big buzzword that funders want to hear nowadays. So these are the elements, and I've read killer thread in the chat. I like that. I'm not sure if it is exactly the same you mentioned, but I call it the golden thread, that all of the elements that you can have in your grant proposal have to have a very clear stepwise golden thread and a link. It should be a coherent story, right? You are proposing your story. It should read like a story. It should be a very clear story, following in a logical way and being coherent. So please make sure, I mean, your project title should be a complete summary of everything that's inside your proposal. Abstract likewise, your background rationale explains, and we'll get to those sections in the protocol, your aim lead to your objectives, and each of those objectives has a specific approach or work method and work plan, team members who will be associated with that, plus timelines. And then ultimately it culminates in your budget and motivating for the items you require in your budget. So the good news is funders usually have templates available. It's very seldom that they will ask you and say, so many pages, write a proposal. They make it easy for you by giving you a template, guiding you exactly what they want in the different sections. So that is why I advocate using your protocol and then using bits of that. You do not have to reinvent the wheel, but you have to make sure that it's going to be a seamless end product with a very logical flow and not just a cut and paste business. So even with font sizes and types, if you cut and paste from different sections, please make sure that you have a very well formatted piece of work. It must be like any other important document, error-free and complete. Don't leave out sections. It must be complete. Right, so the story that you want to propose in your grant proposal has to be a very clear and concise, right? The readers and the reviewer fatigue, that's real. So you have to tell it in as short as possible, very economically, but with enough detail for a reviewer to make a decision. So your clear, concise plan to answer a feasible and a relevant research question in your particular discipline. And it must be built on a very solid rationale or a clear evidence of a gap in knowledge in that particular field. It must be aligned with the funder scope and focus area, and please even use those words. So go back to your guideline document, have a look what they say they want to fund, and you morph it and make yours fit, and even here and there use their words. Of course, very cautiously done. Scientific rigor is essential and not negotiable, and you have to use the appropriate and relevant methods for what you propose to do. Everything that you propose obviously is aligned with the budget. So you request so many rand for so many items, or it could be dollars, it could be yen, it could be euros. It depends what funder you're applying for. And never lose sight that a grant proposal is actually a document whereby you request funding from a funder. You will do the study within the funder's timeline, and it will have and spell it out social value or impact. It will contribute to knowledge in your field. It will contribute to knowledge translation where you do applied, you may develop a prototype, whatever it is, spell it out and indicate that, like I said, even more than one place. Right, so proposal guidelines. That's very important to read and study and highlight where necessary. The second part where you will get the additional clues in what you need to do in the different sections. Let's look at this, just a sample section from a grant proposal template. They will also in there give you an idea what you should do. Here they want an abstract 150 words. They want to the specific aims, the goals of research, and summarize the expected outcomes. So those are all tick box items. Make sure that you address everything that they ask in both of those documents. Okay, it will vary from funder to funder, but I think you will recall here that this very much looks like a study protocol. We typically talk about protocol when we talk about just normal study protocols or ethics protocols, and we typically talk about proposals when we talk about funding or grant proposals. Okay, but technically those are interchangeable terms. So you'll see these headings or the sections in such a template are, it's very similar to a protocol. And then there are certain elements in there that I've highlighted here in maroon that are quite unique for grant proposals, and that may be add-ons to what you won't have in your protocol. But for the rest, you can really delve into what you have written in your protocol and morph it into a grant proposal. Okay, I'm noting the question when we get to budget, so I will definitely address it there. Okay, I'm going to quickly go through some of the sections, and project title, please keep it concise. You may have character limits there. Think about keywords, think about the themes and the focus areas of the funder. Think about discoverability. If people Google, you want to be discovered, so you have to have certain very important words in your title, and try and keep it simple enough so that a non-specialist audience can understand what you propose to do even from your title. So not too technical. And then your abstract, once again, you may be restricted there by 150, 200, 250 words. So be sure to be within that. It's a very tricky thing to write an abstract. I've got a different session for a whole hour just unraveling an abstract and how you write a proper abstract. But it's got to be a very economical piece of work, which is supposed to stand on its own, and even for funders on review panels, just by abstract should tell them exactly what the study is about. It should be representative yet economical, definitely non-technical English, non-specialist audience language, and once again, the administrative reviewers will very commonly use your keywords and elements from your abstract to decide which reviewers should be assigned to your grant proposal. And here I've just got the typical elements of an abstract structure. I think you are all familiar with that in your proposed study. Your information, personal information as principal investigator should be accurate. Typically, they ask for it within the form itself, certain things that may be in your CV. Others may ask of you to attach a CV or a bio sketch. And a bio sketch is actually a golden opportunity for you because it contains a narrative section about yourself where you can explain, maybe you've changed fields, within your discipline, a slight change into a new concept within your discipline where you want to explain why that is. It may be that you raised 3 kids and you were out of research for a few years and it doesn't reflect on your CV. So that's a golden opportunity to explain certain things and why you are aligned for a specific fund from a funder. The research team should be comprehensive. It's one of the flaws of certain applications. All expertise should be on board. So make sure that you involve, if you have very complex stats and none of you or your supervisor, for example, are that experienced, please get a statistician on board, for example. And it's very important for early career researchers to get expertise on board. That's the way you get a foothold into your research career and getting grants awarded to you. Later on, you can be on your own with your own team, but surround yourself with experts and get them on board. So you basically give them all the information that they require from you. Your aim and objectives, very important that it's clear, it's feasible. It's very difficult for me, and I know it depends on the study type, but for quantitative studies, you would typically not really want to have more than 4 objectives for a study, even a 5-year study. Your objectives should not be dependent on each other so that your whole house of cards tumble if your first step doesn't work out. And believe me, I have experienced that in my first attempt of a PhD. This is the one section where I would recommend number them, bullet them or number them, and give the context of a funding application. Context is also so important, and I want to say more about that, but we're limited by time. Your background should have a concise literature review element of current literature, which shows the context where your project comes in, your specific question and what you propose to do. The rationale should indicate the gap in knowledge and why your study should be done and why now. And then the significance, like I said, there's more place than one where you can elaborate on that in a proposal. You must indicate what will the impact be on society. Will you develop a novel product? Will you improve a system or a service or something out of the norm? Just think about something completely out of the box. So that's part of your sales talk in that section. And of course, you don't want to be accused of plagiarism, so you want to reference your sources later on. There is usually a reference section. With your research design and methods, it depends what field you're in, what kind of research you do. You may be doing desktop research, field work, lab-based. You may be in animal work. It could be qualitative, mixed methods, or quantitative. If your study has a specific design, please mention it. I would even say, if you can allow the 1 or 2 words, even do so in your abstract. So it's important to mention the design. And I would say that the one place where people tend to write too much and take too much space of a grant proposal is the background and literature review. Try and keep it concise. And the one place where people tend to skimp and where they should actually have a lot of detail is your methods or methodology. So it depends once again, but coming from the health sciences where we commonly work with participants, you have to elaborate on your study setting area, the populations, sample sizes are important, even calculations for quantitative research, sample inclusion exclusion criteria, motivating for that. The methodology should be very well detailed with references where necessary. And you would also talk about your data analysis plan and your data analysis techniques that you will use, how the data will be interpreted, mention the software if relevant, and also how you're going to statistically analyze that. So what you can see here is it shows a very detailed, clear plan. The reviewer wants to see you know exactly what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, and when you're going to do it. Ethics considerations is important. It's usually within a single section, but it is also important to have it throughout the proposal. It features in a lot of different places because you have to address scientific validity, data management, the protection, social value, and so forth, especially if you work with human participants, and of course also important if you work with animals. The timeline, I would suggest if you can, do it graphically, do it in Excel. There are lovely Gantt charts also available, templates in Excel. Or you can write a narrative work plan or activity list. And if they ask for it, you could include the responsible persons for each of those steps. Your environment and resources, it talks about all of the infrastructure that you have available, the equipment, the resources, all of the lovely things like the library and the e-journals that are available. You want to convince the funder that you've got the surroundings and the environment and resources that will not hamper your success in a study. Preliminary data is only when it's really asked for and when it strengthens your study. You have found something with a pilot study and it's really worthwhile to scale it up, then you would sell it as such. Capacity development is, of course, the one area that is extremely important. Unique to a funder, if you don't address it, you're not going to get funding. That is a unique feature. You can talk about yourself. You may be busy with a PhD, so talk about your own capacity development, having being involved in a project that you propose, and you talk about any others. There could be technical people involved, other staff, community members, even if you do community work, and so forth. So all of that would be capacity development. Please describe it in detail. Outputs, outcomes, and impact. That would be your deliverables, and degrees, and conference contributions. Outcomes would be the outcomes you propose, your research objectives. And then impact, of course, we have talked about that. It's important that you explain that. And grant funders will typically have a section in the application for that. Disseminating findings is very important, and two ways. To the scientific community, that would be typically through conferences and peer review journals, and make sure that you also reach the public and even the participants, if your study involved participants, that information is eventually disseminated to them, your findings. Right, so the budget is really, really the heart of a funding application, and it consists of two parts. Your budget items, what they cost, and the motivation. So based on the guidelines, we said you can only list what the funder is willing to fund. Do not mention non-allowable costs. And use the caps. They may say for certain areas you have a cap, and don't ask for more than that cap, as well as for the entire budget. So the budget must be realistic, and you have to consider inflation and exchange rate fluctuations. So if you are going to do the same kind of thing with 20 samples in year 1, 20 samples in year 2, and 20 samples in year 3, the cost will not be the same. It will escalate with inflation at least annually. Okay, so this is an example. I'm not going to read through it. And this is an example from the Medical Research Council to show you in their guideline documents what kind of level of detail they go into to say what can you budget for, and mentioning the caps for the different categories. And they are also very explicit here, for example, what you cannot budget for example, laptop computers, cell phones, and so forth. So once again, I'm referring back to the guidelines that you have to study very carefully. Yes, I will share the slides with you afterwards. I realize we are running out of time and it's a fast-paced session. You may have heard of direct and indirect costs. So don't break your head. Usually for Stellenbosch University internal grants and most national grants, you just focus on the direct items, your typical things that you can touch and you get invoices for that you purchase. So you can focus on that. If you go for international funding, you may have to consider indirect costs. And those are things that are difficult to put a financial cost on, but are actually costs that are incurred. For example, water and electricity of the university. Someone picks up those invoices and pays for it, but it is not you directly as a researcher. And because of the indirect costs for very complex budgets and full cost budgets, typically for international funders, you will have to include the indirect cost recovery. In other words, that is what Stellenbosch University calculated roughly. If we take all research projects, 25% of indirect costs is what we need to budget for, should a funder allow that. But I want to assure you, and I'm not going to talk about these complex budgets, you have help available in the form of project accountants throughout the university if you have to draw up these budgets specifically for international funders. Other funders, national and local, it's simple. Direct costs, VAT included, and you get to your total, right? So that is really the message I want to leave. It can be quite simple. Cost breakdown. So the motivation is really, for me, when you're in doubt or when the cost breakdown is not evident from what you have indicated there with units. Anytime when you're going to budget for equipment, please motivate why you need that equipment, even though you think, but that's common sense. Always when staffing costs are budgeted for, consultation services, or maybe specialized services, I'm thinking of central analytical facilities. Sorry, what is VAT? Sorry, it's really bad of me. VAT is value added tax. That is the normal sales tax that we in South Africa pay 15% that you see on your Pick and Pay slip as well. So all research costs also include the VAT, the 15% VAT in South Africa. The other thing that you should address in your motivation or justification is if there's going to be a funding shortfall. Or if you have other funding available for the item that this funder will not budget for, that will not allow for, maybe you have a piece of equipment and you will indicate as such so that you make sure the reviewer and the funder is assured that you will have enough money to do the whole project and what you need to do the whole project if they give you the funding that you requested and you are successful. Okay, I'm not going to labor on these two. I'm actually going to skip over, but I'll definitely share the slides with you because it's so difficult for people to write motivations. I've just given you, they're not perfect, but I've just given you an example for quantitative research where I actually like that you use headings of some sort because you've got a blank space there. It's just easier for the reviewer to see that you talk about the different aspects. So I've got this quantitative example for you. And I've got a qualitative example that you can have a look how people motivate or justify certain expenses that they have as line items in their budget. Okay, the last bits of the grant proposal, you may be asked to suggest reviewers, and wow, that is just a great opportunity if you can get that. So please make use of the opportunity. It should not be people from your own institution, let alone your own department. It should not be people, collaborators or supervisors, but it can be peers. Peers are people that you meet at conferences, so meet your colleagues, use that strategically. Conferences are great places to meet the other who's in the field. It needn't be Nobel reviewers. It's simply other colleagues, other institutions that are aware of you. They may not even be aware of you, but you can nominate suitable people. And you may also have an opportunity to exclude certain reviewers. People say, but why would you do that, right? You have to know who your enemies are. But the valid reasons are really that it's people having a conflict of interest, not agreeing with your stance in the field, or being a direct competitor and working on the same thing. And it's the funders will honor this. So please feel free to give them that information. They will honor that. References, appendices, okay, that is common sense that you have to do your references. And I just want to caution, do not attach anything to a funding application unless you are asked for it. Usually the form is complete, but it may be that you have to include CVs of the main stakeholders, the data collection instruments. It may be that you want to or have to include that, ethics approval and so forth. Right, review criteria. Internally, there may be processes where we just do screens to make sure it's complete. We may even have internal review and give you feedback to improve applications. Please take control of your destiny. So responsiveness and completeness, there should be no excuse. You just want to pass the scientific review hurdle, and I'm going to share with you the most important aspects there that you can use as a tick list. Take feedback seriously and improve on your application. And if you have chance, please give it to a colleague, especially a colleague maybe in a different field, because your whole proposal should be understood by them. If you pass that mark, then I'm telling you, you will be in the top proportion of for review. So I'm leaving you with these 6. It's actually common sense, but they look at your rationale, very clear and feasible objectives of your study, linked to the timeline, your restriction there. The project must be relevant and have impact. So spell it out wherever you can. Your methodology, of course, pristine and detailed. The whole project and timeline should be feasible, and inexperienced researchers unfortunately fail by not doing that very well. Budget must be realistic and aligned with the funder. The research team must cover all of the skills required, and make sure that you talk about that in the application form or in the CV, that it's clear that the team is skilled. This is something that I leave in the slides for you, just an example of what is given to a reviewer and what you find in the funding guidelines. So you can have a look how this funder will differentiate sort of between a 1 to a 4 and a 10 score out of 10. And then this is how funding works. A funder will say, no, if it's a score 1 to 4 as described in the previous slide, that's really just bad. We don't want to fund you. All of the others are considered fundable, but the limit is what we call the pay line. How much funding is available? And that is what will determine where the cut-off score is. So your aim would be, you want the best score, possibly. And if you do tick box items from the guidelines and the review criteria, you are bound to be in the top percentile. And then, of course, you need a bit of luck, because you don't want everybody to apply for the same fund. And hopefully there's enough funding available that there can be quite a number of awards made. So you might, with the same one, get another funding the next year and not the previous year. Okay, so I'm going to leave you with tips and traps. It's basically, I'm not going to go through this in the essence of time. All of what I've mentioned throughout, I've summarized for you in the following slides. I've given you an example of how not to sound fancy. I sometimes think it's very good to not be English first language, to keep a document like this very clear, very simple, simplistic English. So I leave this with you, and I would like to just get to a few of these questions in the last few minutes remaining. So apologies for running out of time. I just want to mention, don't want to disappoint you, but getting grant funding is maybe 1 in 5 chances, or 1 in 5 of you. It depends. Some are very much higher percentage and others lower. It depends on competitors and a lot of other features, but get the best score you can, please. Okay, so if there are anyone wanting to raise their hand, I'm just going to answer some of the questions here. We've got the VAT. What
Thank
happens?
you so much, Tanya. That was so okay. I was actually going through the questions whilst you presenting.
Yes.
And I think you've basically covered everything. If I can, I mean, I've read them well, except for the one on what happens if you under budget, as in like providing less than the maximum amount they offered. So if you can just respond to that one. And before she responds, colleagues, we have a few minutes left. If you have a question, you can just raise up your hand or use the chat. Tanya will respond.
Okay, so what happens if you under budget, as in providing less than the maximum amount they offered? If I understand you correctly, Mzi, then yeah, you should be very careful, rather over budget a little bit because of inflation if you apply, but still be feasible. Your budget should be feasible. If you under budget, it's very seldom that afterwards you can ask a funder for more money. I'm not saying it's impossible. You usually work through the person at Stellenbosch University that deals with that funder should you run into a problem like that. So please contact that person. We are all linked to funders out there, so we are there to support, and I can even direct you should you be in such a situation. So be careful of that. Your other option would be to apply to another funder for a shortfall. Talk to your collaborators, maybe some have extra money. It's a difficult thing to manage, but if it's an individual question, I can also deal with that via email with afterwards. Are there other questions? Karma? You're muted. Sorry.
Apologies. Looks like there's no other question. I only see comments.
Pagama, there is from Dr. Lukau. It says, how does one approach writing a grant proposal if there is a limited experience or a small organization?
Thank you.
I'm not sure if you see it.
Yes. Yes, Dr. Lukau, that's a valid question. It's a tricky one. If you take the slides that we will share with you from this session and you apply that together with the funders guidelines, I can promise you, you're going to do a decent piece of work. That will be a good start. Talk to other colleagues, even at other institutions. If you have other colleagues, friends at other institutions, ask for input, ask for anyone with a slightly more experience. If you're a student, then yes, of course, you have to work with your collaborator, or if you're a staff member, work with seniors in your field, even from external institutions. So I hope that will help.
I'm not sure whether Ms. Namuganga was covered on that question that says, please elaborate on context. Perhaps I'm not sure whether you understand what that means, Tanya, or should she explain further?
I missed that one. Is it early up?
It's at 1511. Please elaborate on context. Okay. Just before Dr. Lukau's.
I think I understand what was asked there. So context is everything, and that's actually a huge discussion, but I'll give it to you in 2 sentences. Your study might be because the funder will only offer, let's say this funder, the maximum is 200,000 a year. It's not a lot of money. Maybe your project is bigger, and the bigger project actually needs 1 million rand. then the context, if you apply for the 200,000 Rand grant, it may be that you just attending to one of the facets or one of the objectives of the bigger study to align with the funder, the timeline, and that 200,000 Rand. So give context if there's an umbrella study and yours form part of it, or give context if it's a small funder, you're going to have very little sample size here, but then you call it a pilot study or something like that to say, we will scale it up and apply to bigger funders should we get the nice results from the small pilot study. So it's really about just putting it in context and in that way selling it to the funder. I hope that is helpful.
I hope so too. I don't see any other question or hand up, so I guess you've covered everything that the participants wanted to hear today. Thank you very much. That was so informative and insightful, and I hope it has helped everybody. For further information, the YouTube videos would be uploaded so that you can see the webinar later on. And thank you very much for attending, and please don't forget to register for tomorrow, our last day of the library week. Have a lovely evening, everyone. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Enjoy your evening.
You.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.